Hello, hello? Yeah, there we go. That helps. I forgot I went out there and turned it off. So this is our final show for the semester. It's Motivation for Change. And we have a special guest here from Implement Denmark, a global, actually a Danish or Nordic consulting company that is headquartered in Denmark, 450 consultants, but they work specifically with Nordic-raised companies. So these are companies that were born and raised in the Nordics, but have a global reach. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. This is Henriette Divert-Hendricks, and she is the advisor of the executive management team at Implement. She helps design and implement organizations in global companies. And these companies include Danfoss, Danske Bank, and Novo Nordisk. Now, this presentation is going to be a little bit different than our typical presentations. We're hoping to have more interaction with you because Henriette is quite a live wire herself. So she is going wow, that's a lot to live up to, but I'm sure you can do it. And because of the weather, it seems that a lot of you are at home live streaming, so we hope you enjoy this, but we're sad that you're not here with us today. So for all of you in the audience, we hope that you are ready for an exciting, engaging presentation today. Take everything in that you can get from Henriette. She's going to share a lot of information that's going to be valuable for you in general and specifically for our TEMO course. So without further ado, Henriette.
Thank you very much, Laurie. And thank you for having me this morning. And I can actually definitely understand that some of you stayed at home. I didn't, but I can understand it. It's really October the 1st outside, so that's understandable. What I'm going to do from the very beginning is that I'm going to ask you some fundamental questions around motivating for change. And the reason for that is my experience is that you know much more about this than you think you do. So that's why I'm going to ask questions at the beginning, and then I will sort of come up with some perspectives from my practice background, and then we'll end up discussing. So first 3 questions I'm going to ask you, and I'm just going to ask for show of hands. So I'm not going to, call you up here, so don't worry, right? Or what a pity. So first 3 questions. That's question number 1. So think about yourselves in the situation that you are, and you're a student at DTU, you work with, you've tried, been exposed to different changes in your organization and in your private life. When you hear about change and imagine that something came upon you as a change, would you then spontaneously think yes, or would you spontaneously think, oh no, right? So who of you would spontaneously think, yes, I really like changes, that's something for me, I'm that kind of person? And who would say, no, not really. I really don't appreciate that. That's actually quite fun. That's nearly 50-50. Surprising answer. I'm going to say it was a little bit more yes than no. Is that fair? Right? I think so. That's the sound here, right? Isn't it true? I'm just going to take off my earring. That might be it. So, next question. Imagine that there's an organizational change being implemented in the organization you're in. So when that happens, would you then, on one hand, say, great, I'll follow whatever somebody decides, because that's okay with me, but I don't want to be involved in doing the work? Or would you rather, on the other hand, be in charge of it and try to influence it? So those of you who think, I'll just follow, I won't be influencing the change, but I'll just follow, show me your hands. Who would that be? A handful of people. And who would like to be, if there's a change to be implemented in my organization, I'm going to influence it. I'm going to be in charge, and that was a strong difference there, right? Isn't it fair to say that quite a few people said, I'll follow, and very many said, I want to be in charge? Last question. Imagine that now you've implemented a new way of doing it. I work in an organization right now where they've implemented a new way of approaching customers, for example. So for a couple of years, they've been doing these different customer programs so that they are trying to align the way that they approach customers. So a couple of years down the line, when they've tried to implement this new way of working, where would you be? Would you be either following the new way doing it the standardized way, the way that your colleagues have proposed, or would you still be doing it your own way, my way, right? So show of hands for who will be doing it the new way, following the instructions. Good to see, thank you. And who would be doing it my way? I don't give a damn, I'll still be doing it. So that's actually a few of you. So it's fair to say more people will do it the new way, but some of you will still do it your own way. Of course, I've been asking these questions for quite a few people, before you guys. So this was my projection of what you would answer. I would think you would say, yes, we love changes. I would think you would say, but we want to be in charge. And at the end, I will follow the new way of doing it. That would be sort of the normal way that I would think you would answer. A fun thing is, more than normally, some of you say no. So just a fun thing around that. I think it might be because you are more honest than most of the people that I ask. You know what I'm saying with that? Because over the last couple of years, there is this sort of political correctness around change. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be change-minded, so to speak. So thank you for the honesty. But the learnings from these three fundamental questions are quite dramatic. What we are concluding is people, on the one hand, like changes, as long as they can be in charge. And at the end of the day, even if they were not in charge, and even if they didn't like the change, a majority of you guys are going to do it. Right? So that's important when we're going to discuss motivation for change today, because we can argue that the only thing we need to get right is how do we make sure that many people feel that they're in charge. Right? If you look back on the theory that's been written on change, then 20, 30 years ago, there was this perception that some people were yesers and some people were noers. Now, I would argue we are all both, right? When some changes come along, sometimes we're positive, sometimes we're negative. Most of the time, most of us are positive, as long as we get influence, right? So these are the only three fundamental lessons you need to know about motivating for change. People love it, as long as they can influence it, and even if they do hate it, a couple of months or years down the line, they will follow the new way of working. Right? So even if they work like this all the way, I don't want to, at the very end, you will be following the new practice. Okay? So actually, this is all you need to know. But just to build on that, I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to say a little bit about the theory, all the people who have been writing about change, and then I'm going to be very pragmatic and talk about some principles around working. So the first thing I would like to do is actually to show you two people who have written about this. I know he's very blurry, but he is out there in reality. So I would like you, when you look at these two people, and just imagine that these were two people who in your organization were in charge of a change process. Imagine you're in an audience, the CEO comes up and says, we will be working on a new way of working globally. We would like you to collaborate more across the different areas. And this colleague will be leading you. This colleague will be instructing heading the change. If it was the guy on the left, how would you imagine the change would be? What does he look like? Give me some adjectives, give me some words on what does he look like. Sorry? CEO-like, yes? What about his personality? What way would he be running the... Please? Straight? Keep it coming? Determined? You're so right, you don't even know it. Yeah. Boring? I'll let him know. Sorry? Mad? Yeah. There's wrinkles on his, yeah, that's very true, forehead. More words on him, on the left? Reserved. Please, more words. Old school. Great. I'm laughing because he deserves it. I will let him know in an email later on. Sorry? Strange? Strange. He might not appreciate that one. Okay, let's move to the right. If so imagine again, you're in the organization, you're in the meeting, your CEO goes, so this is the colleague of ours who's going to head this new way of working globally, and the man on the right is heading it. what would you expect? Cool? Huh? Laid back? No tire guy. I'm just gonna, because that's a, no tie guy, right? That's a good point. Yeah? More words? Kind? Orderly? Yeah? Yeah. More words on him? More motivating? Cool. That's enough. Do you know who they are? You probably do, right? Do some of you know who he is? The guy on the left? This is the grand old man of change. This is Mr. John P. Cotter. Those of you who've been to Harvard Business School will know that he is next to God. On that school, he probably run in the business area. The turnover in his department is humongous. There's a little house on the campus that is only for Mr. John P. Cotter. The lawn there is cut nicer than on the rest of campus, right? If you look on the web, you will see that this whole language around change, all these words that we don't know we know, so burning platform or guiding coalition, words like that come into our mind when we work in the field, they were all invented by John P. Cotter. He represents a way of working that is very much like this, right? It's called planned change. So basically his argument is, if you plan for it really well, you can control the process of changing other people, right? It might not be in a boring or a mad way, but there's the intention is definitely to put in some phases and to actually guide people through a way of working. He has sort of 7 things that he thinks organizations should remember, so it's kind of a recipe book around how does change work. About, I want to say, 60 to 70% of the literature that's written on change, I would argue, is in this, comes from this source, so to speak. So it's Cotter and disciples from that area. The other guy to the right, there was never very big houses built for this guy. He's from South Africa. He's called Ralph Stacey. He has a much more constructive perspective on change. And it's very, very, I want to say, these words are extremely spot on in relation to how they write. And the reason why these words are important is that another motivator we know is that when changes come along to a great number of people, then there are 3 things that you pay attention to. One is, do we understand the change? The next one is, do I like the change? And the third and most important is, do I like you? So the person who is in charge of the change seems to be extremely important. Which is why, of course, you can imagine, if we have a reorganization, and we actually put a Cotterish type of person heading the change, it will become, there will be a certain way of working. Whereas if we put a Ralph Stacey type of person on a very hard change, we might get a better result, so to speak. So manning change process is extremely important. So basically, on the right-hand side, the perspective is, well, change is all about words. So basically, the way we work with change is that we try to have people think and talk in a different manner about their organizations. And when they do that, they will slowly but surely also work in a different way. Whereas on the left-hand side, basically the argument is, as long as you tell a logical story, people will follow, right? Another fundamental difference is, of course, also that if you look at the way you think about changes, this side of this side normally thinks it's 3 phases. It's sort of like this, right? Beginning, middle, end. Whereas Ralph Stacey would say, it's kind of like this, right? It's kind of a pattern of mess, but suddenly people in a certain area start speaking in a special way, and then it turns out to become much more of a shared story, so to speak. So 2 fundamentally different ways of working. It's important to say that when you're out there in reality, my experience is that you need to do both at the same time. And it's kind of a challenge, because most of us are mostly like this or mostly like that. right? From a person, which is why when we work with change processes, it's extremely important that we're more people than one, right? Because then we can actually, in a large organization, imagine a 15,000 people organization spread out globally, and there are more perspectives coming from headquarters. It's much easier if you sit in an affiliate in Greece. It's much more easy to identify if you have different people representing the change. So that's something we work with. Cool, thank you for this. This was very spot on. I think that they will appreciate these words. Ralph might get more happy than John Cotter, but he is such a rock star, so it doesn't really matter. He can handle it. So what I would like to do now is just to talk you through 5 principles of practicing. And the reason for that is, so the whole language started like this. You know, beginning, middle, end. We'll do something, and then we'll work for a while, and then we just need to reinforce it afterwards. Actually, you know, back in the day, those 3 phases have been there all the time. That's the way we've been thinking about changes. But for me, it's very hard sometimes in organizations when we work with changing the perspective of a couple of thousand people's way of looking at life. You can't really predict when it's going to happen, right? So instead of just saying we have these 3 phases that we work through, I would rather think around principles. So these principles are a way of talking with colleagues, but also people out there who are responsible for change processes, and talking to them about what do you think works. So these 5 things tend to work. So normally I would just think through these 5 principles while I'm working, and then thinking through the principles will remind me what we miss in the process, so to speak. So first one is effect. Typical thing is whenever change is introduced, people ask one single question. Why? Right? So mostly in organizations, I work with private and public companies, but no matter whether it's public or private, they normally say, well, because we need to save money or we need to do it more efficiently. So very often it's a number argument. Now, the problem is, of course, that very few of us, on the long run, get motivated by numbers, right? So the fact that we can say, well, if we do it like this, we will create more value for the shareholders, or we will have happier customers, that's not very important for a surgeon or an engineer working with constructing bridges. So then there tends to be other effect measures than numbers. They tend to be more efficient. So we're trying to spread out the story around what kind of effect are you trying to create here. And at least 3 ways of measuring effect we need. So numbers, of course, but then also how does it help out there in the world? And then, you know, from an employee point of view, how will I work in a different way? How can this inspire me? So those are the 3 things that we need to focus on. But very often when I come into companies and I talk to the executive team and I ask, but why are you doing this? They don't really know. Because it's a project that they maybe designed because everybody else is doing it, right? So very important to get back to the basic question of why. Next principle is called importance. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means, just imagine again, so we are 3,000 people. Imagine that this is the organization, different layers. When you're working in an organization, things that seem extremely important to the top of the organization might be not very important for people who are working out there in everyday life, right? So we need to figure out what's important for all of us, and we need to find out how can we make it important. Normally, people on the top of the organization who are highly educated think that you create importance through talking. So they will invite you in and have a meeting where you talk about stuff. And if you're, for example, in a production company that I've been working with recently, if there's something that they really hate out there on the production line, it's being called in for a meeting where we have to talk about a new way of doing stuff. They absolutely think it's a waste of time. But if you take the same number of people and actually put them in a bus and drive them over to another company and let them walk through the production area and look at how could we do things more like these guys are doing it, they will start doing it. You know what I'm saying? So we need to think about cleverly, how do we create importance for different types of people? And that's why we've done it like this. So some people actually create importance in their minds, but quite a few people create importance through being there, right? Walking through another production area. And this is key because quite often we are planning something that doesn't work at all. And the executive team will normally choose something that they think will work, but won't work for their employees. Third principle, which is probably the principle that I've become most humble about. It's the principle around people. So my argument would be that when you want to motivate for change, the thing that seems to matter the most is who's in charge of it. And it seems as if there's somebody who's credible in the organization, you can put him or her in front of nearly all the changes you want to, so to speak. So normally when you want to implement a new way of working, it could be customer service, or it could be efficiency in the production. Very often you will find somebody as a project manager who knows about the stuff. But from a change point of view, from a motivation point of view, you should always find the one who has the most power in the organization. Because power and influence is much more important from a change point of view than is the subject matter expertise, so to speak. So actually, quite often what happens is that you get these people who are good at, those of you who are Danes will know that the tax authorities in this country, they have a very, mixed reputation, you could argue. But they have done tremendously well on streamlining and making their organization much more efficient. And I would argue the people who have been doing that in that organization, they can implement nearly all the changes they would want because they have really great backup from the organization. So that's extremely important. Another fun thing is, of course, that sometimes when you then want to implement a new change, you hire a new guy because he knows a lot about customer service, so let's get him over to us. And of course, that's the worst thing you can do, right? Because imagine being the new guy on the block. I'm here to implement changes on the way that you've been working for years. Well, good luck, right? And that's also why when you before said something about Cutter and Stacy and their personalities, I think that's extremely important is that if you're in charge of a change process, when you get out there and you are chosen as the project manager, remember that you need to put somebody next to you who's extremely different. You need to have somebody who can sort of talk to the rest of the organization, so to speak. So you need to be quite honest on how are you being perceived by other people. And this is, of course, also where when external consultants, people like I, work as change agents in organizations, you can imagine how humble we have to be. Because if we actually jump into the organization and try to play a little bit too much hardball, then there will be consequences, right? The organization is going to say, get out of here, right? Fourth principle is the principle around energy, which is actually quite interesting when I look at the change process. So we can be working for 1.5 years on a change process, but if I look back at the 1.5 years, it will normally be the success or failure of the project will normally have been this half hour or those 20 minutes or that intro, right? So it's about the long stretch, but it's also about moments. It's about conversations where people talk to each other and they sit there and think, do I trust this CEO? Do I think he can handle this? And those moments are either the turning moments where it goes better or where it goes worse. I was working in an organization where I was helping the HR director implement a new HR strategy in a global organization. And in her area, there was around 40 employees. And we had been working on the strategy, and it was ready, and people had been participating and stuff like that. And we were going to have a meeting with the employees. And her 40 employees had been sort of crammed into a quite small room, and we didn't know about this. So but I should have known. So we open the door, and the first thing this quite new HR director says is, "Ooh, you're many. You're a lot of people." So what do you think everybody was thinking? Who will lose their jobs, right? So it took us around 1.5 months to get rid of that rumor that somebody was going to get fired. So just to say, this around energy and situations is extremely important, right? You actually get people on board, or you push them away from only one experience. Another thing is also, that's why, of course, it's a challenge when the executive management team wants to talk all the time, is that very often what they will say, people won't listen to, right? Because it's a long argument. Just think about it. Up here in the top of the organization, they might have been thinking about this for 6 months, right? So the next level has been thinking about it for 6 weeks, and 6 days, and 6 hours, and 6 minutes. So at the moment where they tell about it, that we have decided this, then they have had so much time to think that it sounds like a long, rational decision. But these guys, who hear it for the first time, they will have all these different questions. And normally, the changes that are being implemented have the largest effect on the bulk of the organization, the employees or the middle management. So normally what happens from an energy point of view is that these guys who've been thinking about it for 6 months come out and give a speech, and they expect everybody to say, "Yay!" And they don't. They say, "Why? Who? What? How? Are you sure this is a good idea?" They have all the hesitation that the executive management team had only 6 months ago, right? So much of the challenge is, how can we make sure that the whole organization talks about stuff before the executive management team decides? Because if they don't have the chance to do that, then they will be extremely demotivated, right? If you want to do something and you ask people about it 2 minutes before you make your decision, that's not okay, right? Because then you have made your decision anyway. Last thing that seems to be of great importance is authenticity. And I mean, these years, I can nearly, the word is a little bit, but it's about being authentic as top management. So a very good example is a global company that was born and raised here, Lego, that you will know. In the mid, 5, 6, 7, they were going through a lot of turmoil. And if you sat in on some of the meetings that their CEO was having when he actually started out, you would hear somebody saying, "Just so that you know, I don't have many plans. We all need to help each other. And if we don't make it, there is no plan B. We will not have production in this country anymore. So we all need to get together and do something." So not pretending to have all these different solutions, but actually ask for help, was a very obvious principle for the CEO, the present CEO at Lego, when he started out in his role. And if you look through the CEOs who have been through a lot of dramatic changes in the organization, you will see that the way they use themselves is very honest. And that's, of course, because it's necessary. When you go through changes that are important and strategic for an organization, the organization needs to trust the executive management team. And the easiest way of trusting an executive management team is if you can feel that there's actually something at stake right now, that they're still thinking about it, they're still worried. And that's also why when you sit there and listen to the conversations, what normally tends to become a highlight is the moment where an employee who's been there for a long time says, "Why?" And the executive team has a good answer. So that's normally the highlight. So those was an attempt to go through 5 principles that as a practitioner seem to be important all the way through. And whereas I would actually hesitate to having a recipe book for each of the phases. Just as a last thing, I'll just show you. Normally, normally we think about change processes as the 3 different phases that I was talking about, but with a lot of different activities that we can't really know from the beginning. And this is, of course, great frustration for an executive team, you can imagine. So normally we say, let's give people at least 3 months to think about that we will be working in a new way in order to do this, right? We will be doing something around outsourcing. We need to do something before Easter next year. We don't know yet how much we'll do. We don't know where our production will be, but we will have to do something. So that's the first couple of months. And then the middle is called, we normally refer to that as living. That's where we do pilot projects and we do analysis and we think about solutions and we decide an implementation process. And that can take all the way from 3 months up until a year. And then after the new way of working has been implemented, there's still quite a few employees who do it their own way, right? And that's why we call it revisiting, because there will always be new employees doing it their own way or not knowing it. So this is just to show you that while we are working, there's a lot of different activities going on. Some of it we plan as externals, some of it the organization plans, but there's always 2 focuses. One is setting the direction, underpinning the why, and the other one is executing whatever we'll be doing. I think that's about it for now. I'll do like this. I don't know.
Okay.
Should I black it or no? You'll do that.
Georgie will take care of it. Please have a seat. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, hope you guys are preparing your questions because we're going to be having you jump in here and get some more details. We'll pick her brain. That sounds exciting. But you were talking about motivational aspects. A lot of it seemed to be very intrinsic as to what is helpful for motivating the change. However, the evaluation seems to be more extrinsic. You were talking about the numbers versus. So how do you as a consultant go in and connect the dots between the intrinsic motivation and the outcomes that are often extrinsic?
Well, we try to combine it through having a lot of different stories around why we're doing this. And basically, so I think about 3 types of motivators, right? I think about number motivators, like we talked about. So quite a few people are driven by efficiency and we want to do it in the right way. And then I think about motivators that have to do with doing good stuff for other people. So how can I see that my customers of this bank are benefiting from this? And that's much more sort of a personal experience, which is also very important for other sectors like hospitals. And so we try to combine it through what we call indicators that combine the 3 focuses. So numbers, patients or customers out there, and then you can argue good solutions. Quite a few employees are driven by good solutions. They don't really care about the numbers that are being produced out there. But if I can argue, this solution is kind of cool. Nobody else in the world have been working like this. That's normally also a driver. So I know that you had Novo Nordisk as a visitor last time. So for years and years, Novo Nordisk have had a number that sort of combined those 3 focuses. It's called COGS, so it's cost of goods sold. So they had a number for that. Now that could combine, no matter whether you were focused on numbers or whether you were focused on how to produce the goods or you were focused on the diabetic patients out there, that number could combine those 3 motivational positions. So that's how we try to do it.
So ideally, you want to make integration of both the intrinsic and the actual extrinsic.
But yeah. And very often it's through numbers and through conversations. And with conversations, I mean patients coming in saying, just know that you really made a difference with this product. Or so actually bringing the outside in, not only the numbers, but also the people who benefit from the product, so to speak.
Okay. I'm thinking of, you were mentioning that Implement is a company that focuses on the Nordics and the the culture must be very Nordic in its essence. And so I'm wondering, would it be fair to say that the development and the way that you go out and approach your global change management or your consulting, is that more Stacy related? I mean, it's the cultural aspects of being in Denmark tend to lean more towards Stacy's than
So a few words on that. I think so. So what normally happens? Imagine the companies that you know, we've mentioned: Novo Nordisk, Danske Bank, ISS, Danfoss, Grundfos, all the company, Lego. What normally is the case is you have 10,000 people of different origin, but then the upper crust, the 10 people at the top, are Nordic, right? So that means a lot for example, decision making. Now, the luxury of having a Nordic executive team is that they tend to not be scared of actually exposing the decisions before they're made, right? So, for example, if you wanted to reorganize your production globally in Lego, it wouldn't scare a Nordic executive team to have that conversation going on in a larger group. That might scare an executive team who had another cultural background, national cultural background. So I tend to agree with you. Yes, there are things that we can do because we have a Nordic upper crust, but there are also things that we can't do. One of the things we can't do is to have very square decisions and you know, you could argue conflict handled head on. You know what I'm saying with that? So what I tend to advise on is, how is it an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time to have a Nordic upper crust? So that's of course what you do. Whether that's Stacy or whether that's Cutter, that depends so much on the executive team, right? Because right now I'm thinking of a Nordic born and raised executive team who are extremely risk averse. They absolutely hate to not be able to predict stuff. So there I would argue that the plan that we've made out is extremely planned and extremely Cutter. But when they make decisions, of course they do it in a Nordic manner.
Right.
And a Nordic manner is, compared to the rest of the world, extremely involving and slow, you would argue. But on the other hand, then when the decision is made, it's actually made.
Right.
So you don't redo it, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, well, also while we're still in the culture realm,
Yeah.
Over the last 10 years, change management has changed pretty dramatically, I believe.
Yeah.
And in thinking of how the trend for also just from a cultural standpoint, that more organizations are becoming feminine. Yeah. And by feminine, I'm thinking in like a Hofstede type, not because it's all becoming women executives, but that it is more focused on collaboration and openness. Yeah. So how does that affect the way that you go out into the workforce, and are you seeing that there is more openness to making these changes, to collaboration and following your kind of a model for change?
That change is quite dramatic. I think that and maybe it's not only feminine, maybe I also see it, organizations right now, you know, take Lego, and I'm just mentioning them because it's so typical. I think it's much more the organization is sort of being open towards the community out there, right? So when a fun story around Lego, there are 10,000 employees, but nearly 300,000 adult users of Lego, right? So I would argue, who is Lego? Is Lego the 10,000 people who are employed, or is it the 300,000 who are daily ambassadors for Lego? Who are creating the business? I would argue that quite a lot of the business is created outside of Lego. So so maybe it's not even only feminine, maybe it's the fact that organizations have become open networks of people who are all the time always being influenced. And that means that when you're an executive team, yes, you need to be more open. Yes, you need to be more collaborative. Yes, you need to be more listening to your customers, to your competitors, to everybody, because things are happening so fast. And whether you can call that feminine, you probably can. It's also just a very democratic way of working as an organization. And in some ways, there is an advantage of being Nordic because we've been used to that for quite a while, because the way of talking in the Nordics has always seems, at least the time I've been living, it's been the way we've been thinking and talking to each other through conversation, right? So we are very used to that.
Yes.
But I find North American executives, Asian executives, South American executives, it's also a matter of personality, right? So I think that the variety is great right now. You can't really predict on the national background how people behave in an executive team. But I would say the trend from being because I say so, because I said it, towards I have to argue why we're changes, that has come to stay. You know, nobody listens to daddy just because he says so.
Yeah.
That patriarchal CEO approach is dead and gone. And I would argue that goes for all over the world. I mean, a company called like Tata, that you probably, you know, humongous Indian company. If you ask the executives in Tata about why are you doing IT services and cars and blah blah blah, they will say, well, because India needs it. You know, not because I say so, but because the society out there needs this, right? So just to say, they are the most collaborative of all, even if we think of Indian national culture as being quite sort of large power distance from a Hofstede point of view, right? So I think that companies right now are operating in an open and a collaborative manner because we have to, and some of us also because we like to.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. We're going to be getting ready for some questions. So Sarah and Søren are going to be watching for your hand, so feel free to start raising it. We're going to talk about employee ownership. One of the big issues is, of course, as you mentioned, there's a long thought process that takes place with upper management before changes are expected to be, before often many companies even present the possibility of change to their employees, and then there's a sense of urgency as to, we want it done now. So as a consultant in your daily work, how do you address this? How do you get buy-in and ownership from the bulk of those affected?
And this is, of course, the essence of the challenge, right? And I want to say we try to avoid exactly what you said. We try to avoid executive teams sitting for months discussing something and playing clever and then coming out and saying, we are going to do this. We try to, so that will give you a good example. A couple of years ago, I was working with the capital region of Copenhagen, and they were reorganizing some surgical units. There was 5 units, and they wanted to go down to 2 larger units. Now, either you can sort of say, we're not going to say anything to the employees because that'll scare them to death. And they've probably never thought about this before. And so we'll just make that decision, and then when we've made the decision, we'll tell people, and then they'll do it. Now, they actually did the opposite, not because they wanted to, but because because it's a public organization, you have to put out your strategies in advance. So in their strategy, in their long-term strategy was written, in 2017 or something, we will have only 2 surgical departments, and they will be in these 2 hospitals. Now, the fun thing was, even already in 2014, they had to shut down the 3 departments. Well, why? Because the employees could see, well, if in 2017 these 2 units will be the best ones to be at, then that's where we will be moving. So it was a story of just by saying, this is how we're going to do it in the future, but we don't really know when and how and what we'll do. Employees started doing exactly what the executive team wanted them to do, but they didn't have the argument. And that's basically what you want to aim for. And I think, my experience is that executive teams are so scared to ask people because they think they'll answer the wrong thing. It's like, why would they? Employees are completely reasonable. If you say to employees, listen, the way we produce things here is a little bit too pricey. We have to shift that. Otherwise, we'll have to shift the production to another country. Can you think of ways where we could actually reduce costs? They will come up with reasonable, fair, good solutions. And I'm like, sometimes it's also, just imagine, we're 5 people here. We are very clever because we're in the executive team. But do we really imagine that out there in an organization of 1,000 people, they are not thinking about outsourcing? They are not thinking about efficiency? They are not thinking about clients, service for clients? Of course they are, much more than we are as executive teams. So I'm always trying to help the executive team go out and talk to their organization as early as possible. Because if you ask employees, what they want from executive teams is they want to talk to them while they are still thinking. And executives who only talk to their employees when they're completely certain and when they are really ready, they are the least efficient executives, right? Because then the employees just think, oh, he's really prepared himself. So basically, we try to involve the organization in discussing very early. Does that mean employees decide everything? No. It means that when you go asking, when you have questions, you think about the questions in common. But the solution, sometimes the executives have to decide, right? But having the conversation early is really important. And I think companies are improving on that immensely, and I'm very impressed. Some executives are really, really good at going out there. And the organizations who transform the best tend to be the organizations where the executive team are best at doing that. Otherwise, you'll see them, moving like this. So they'll be squeezed into turnaround, for example, because they haven't transformed organically in between, so to speak.
Okay. Are we starting to have some questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Jakob, Electrotechnology. I'm from a small company, Upri, where we try to implement information technology into workshops. But we often face the problem that management wants some information technology because they want some answers to how much machines are used, how people are used, and so forth. And there's a split between what the management want and the people on the ground in the workshops. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with that split between what the people on the floor wants and the management wants?
I think that from a transformational point of view, our work, and I don't know your work well enough, but my work is very often to get those viewpoints closer to each other, right? Because basically the notion that what the employees want is less good for the company, I don't think is true. I normally think of the employees being the closest to the clients. So normally there's more truth to what the employees say than what the management, because they are close to the. So on a daily basis, they have a good example is a couple of years ago I worked for a telecompany, producing telephones, and I was working with the executive team, and they were saying, well, people always want, customers will always want a landline. They will, private customers will always want a landline. You want a telephone in your home, right? That's the way the world runs. How many of you have got landlines? How many of you got a telephone at home that's not a cell phone, right? Good thing. So I was sitting there with the 20 executives having that perspective, and the employees out here saying, that's not right, that's not how we do it. So what I did was, I can't have, executives cannot be convinced by employees, because then they would lose face, right? So I invited in a group of people like you, just 5 or 7 people in their 20s, and I had them talk about what is your use of telephone. And the last question I asked them was, have any of you got landlines? And they said, just like you, no, and we wouldn't want one. So in that way, I brought the two viewpoints together by bringing in a third perspective. And that's what we very often do. But of course you're right that it's a challenge when you are working with the organization. It's a challenge to have them think in the same way. But as an external, I always think about what will be best for the company. In this case, it was best for the company if the executive team actually learned that the perspective of the employees was the right one. Another example I've had is a hospital. So we were working with the hospital, and all the nurses and doctors were saying, no, patients would not want to have to go and visit the hospital in the evenings. They want to be home with their families in the evenings. That's not we don't want to be open in the evenings. And the executive team was saying, that's not true. If you're a professional and if you have to have a blood sample taken or blah, 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 you will want to do it 9 o'clock Thursday evening, because then it doesn't disturb your everyday work. Now again, they were disagreeing, but from an organizational point of view, I would argue it was best if the employees could actually see, you're probably not right. There will be a lot of patients out here who would want to have their things done in the evening so it doesn't disturb their work. So in that situation, we did the opposite, right? Invited in some patients, convincing the nurses and doctors that No, actually they would like to have their things done 9 o'clock Thursday evening. So what we try to do is we try to get the viewpoints closer together by bringing in a third party. And normally it's always the clients. But sometimes it can also be a competitor, right?
Other questions? Well, I have a question. And that's, what do you do when with the change that you are coming with? When you go to an organization, you figure out something that has to be implemented, and it supersedes the competencies of the executive management crew. I don't know how often you experience that.
Yeah, that can happen. I was just thinking about. Thinking about a specific case. So just to say, normally an organization has the competence, but of course it's always fragile if the competence is outside the people who think they're competent.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So normally you will have somebody who thinks he or she knows, but the rest of the organization will decide whether he or she has got that, authority in the organization. I'm thinking right now of a case I had where in the executive team, it was a media organization, and in the organization, media is one of the craziest organizations right now because the use that we have for TV and radio and web and blah blah, it's changing every day, so to speak. And in this organization, again, the employees out here, they were very aware of the fact that now people are using web much more than they are using TV. But in the executive team, there was still one of the guys who had, I would argue, the old view. So slowly but surely, he was being squeezed out of the executive team. Can you imagine? Because his viewpoint was kind of, outdated. And I had to say to him, you need to go out and become interesting, right? Because right now, everybody else is thinking that you're so much last year.
Yeah.
And of course, what we had to do was, how could we send him out somewhere and get him inspired? Because otherwise he would be dead man walking. In that way, organizations are extremely cynical. If people are not good enough, the organization will go somewhere else, right? So even though you have a seat on the executive team, if you're not worth your seat, so to speak, you're actually right now being played out of the game, so to speak. But I haven't been in situations where we've had to let go of individuals because of the initiative, because we've always been able to find somebody else in the organization to actually do the work. But quite often I've been, the board will have said, we need another COO for this. Mm-hmm. One discussion that's going on a lot these years, you can imagine, is also, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, of course, the executive teams we've seen have been turnaround teams, right? So they've been good at reduction and efficiency and restructuring and simplification and stuff like that, cutting down. And a discussion is, of course, is that kind of team really good when an organization needs to do the exact opposite? Mm-hmm. So when you're then going into growth, do we then need to reorganize our team, or can they actually shift themselves perspective-wise? And sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't. And then it's often the board who actually determines that, right? But I'm of the view that I think organizations shift their executive teams more often than they have to. Okay. I think quite often you could actually educate your teams, develop your teams, if you wanted to. But of course you need disturbance also. You need a new colleague in the team sometimes. Okay.
My name is Webb. I have a question for you about the honesty you said the executive members use when they want changes. Mm-hmm. But if you work in a company with a lot of secretive projects and classified materials, this imposes a high level of difficulty in being open and honest. Yeah. How do you manage these difficulties?
That's a very good question. And I agree with you. Although I would say that quite often we overdo how secretive we need to be. So, for example, I very often work for publicly rated companies. So of course they will say, well, we can't discuss this because we are out there on the stock market, and what if it influences that? And I would argue, bullshit, of course you can. But if it is classified, and if you can't involve, then I would normally say to the team, just know that your organization is fair. So if you say to the organization, like we did in a financial organization. It's been a tough year. We need to let go of 10% of the company. We have not been able to tell you that before now. From now and until we execute, there will only be 1 week. We don't think it's fair, but that's the way we've had to do it. Normally, that will keep up the trust. You know what I'm saying with that? So most employees and most organizations are extremely fair, as long as they can feel that you wanted to be as open as you could, right? So it's not a matter of being open, it's a matter of trying to be open. And when you cannot be open because of, practical or formal reasons, then you tell that.
Please, Mike.
Sorry. Another questions are, you said something about the environment, that the task and goals might be setting the environment more than the global environment, the cultural environment. Mm-hmm. Why and how do you see that in effect in everyday production?
But I say that again, I didn't understand that.
That you said that the culture might not have such a big impact on the way leaders manage as the task and goals environment, task and goals inflict the environment. How do you see that in everyday production?
No, what I'm just saying is that that the prediction, so the conversation as far as I heard it that we had is the ability to predict how the culture will be in an organization. I have become more and more humble around that, because when I go out there and I meet individuals and see what they're doing, my ability to predict, this is a very German culture. It's much more. There's so much more that influences the culture, and very often what you need to do influences the way you work. Right? So people actually shift behavior depending on what they need to do. I don't know whether that was what you asked for.
Well, it sounds very much like we're shifting from a more Hofstede approach to this is the way cultures were. Part of that was, in fact, probably because of the lack of the technology at the time, because we were more in silos culturally speaking, and now there is more cross-culture, and there's something called culture. There's cultures of practice, is what you're talking about. So people are actually more alike based on their engineers are more alike probably in each country than, for example, an engineer would be to his next door neighbor from the same country. So you were kind of shaking and like, I don't know if that helps to add some depth.
But that is a very good viewpoint. And another, just a fun. I was sitting listening to a CEO the other day, and in a global organization, and he's a very good example of this. He is Swedish-Danish by origin, lived most of his life in Sweden up until he turned 18. Then he moved to the U.S. He lived in the U.S. from he was 18 till 53. Came back to worked in the global organizations all the time. Came back to the Nordics, and he has been working all those years in the U.S. and Middle East and Japan and Brazil. So, if you were to say something about him culturally, it is that he's extremely open-minded, but he's still very much an engineer. Yeah. So just that was his way of speaking was very open-minded to everything. But the bottom line was, if it's not efficient, then it's not okay. I thought that was
He's still going to connect more with his engineer buddies. Yes.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Mikaela. I wanted to ask you, why are you here? What motivates you? So you have your 3 points. So just
what motivates me as a person, and why am I working?
Why are you working with what you are?
That's a very easy question. I work because I can see that what I do helps people do it faster than they could have done otherwise. And that's magical to me. So it's magical to me to have the luxury of jumping into a large hospital, and I can hear the nurses and the doctors are annoyed with each other, and even the doctors amongst each other are like, argh. And through working with them for a little while, suddenly they are talking to each other in a way that my kids only did when they were not teenagers, right? So that's my motivation, and I think that and the reason I would like to talk to you today is that I think, well, basically I think that that very often you as engineers have the roles of transforming the organization, and that's a challenging role. So the reason why I'm here today talking to you about it is that I hope that I can sort of contaminate you with this, need to actually go out there and change, because it's worth it. It's really fun. So my motivator for working is that I can see that what I do works, and a couple of years ago I was overhearing and she probably said it in a better way. I was overhearing my daughter talking to two of her friends at the kitchen table, and her friends were asking, "So what does your mother do?" And Anna said to them, "Well, she helps grown-up people behave nicer at work." And one of her friends said, "Is that possible?" And the other friend said, "That must be hard." And so basically, if I look at the executive teams and think of myself as a mom and as a professional, the difference between what I do is marginal, right? But so basically, that I help people collaborate better than they would have done had I not been there.
Okay, do we have some more? Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Jacopo, and my question is, if has it ever happened to you to work for a company where they are trying to change something, but you just understand that they are not ready for that from a cultural point of view or whatever, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, that very often happens. Jacopo, just to say, so a specific example of that, a couple of years ago, I was working for a large production company that you will know in the energy sector. It's a global company, and they wanted in their R&D organization, they wanted to implement Lean. Most of you will have heard about Lean, right? And I was going over there to talk to their executive team in the R&D area and their middle management about Lean and what is that all about from a leadership point of view. What does it take from you as a leader? And during one of the first breaks, one of the managers, so there were 40 managers in an area where there were 1,200 people or something. And one of the managers comes up to me and says, "Henry, Lean, what does that mean?" So when one of the 40 managers in a 1,200 people company doesn't even know what the word Lean means, then we should postpone the initiative, right? So that was our discussion. And I would say it's much better to say, we will be working with Lean R&D during 2015. We don't really know how we'll be doing it. We hope you'll all become curious about it, because from January the 1st, we will start. That's a much better way of working with organizational change than pushing it, right? So just to say, timing and the discussion around when do we actually have this conversation with the organization is something that we very, very often talk with the executive team around. And you can just imagine, Jacopo, in the executive team, they are so impatient, right? So the fun thing is, of course, that while they've started talking about Lean, and just as the organization gets ready to do something, they will be talking about customer service, or they'll be talking about... So, of course, very often as an external, I have to be the party killer saying, not now. So that's what we very often do. On the other hand, I want to say, sometimes also there is a momentum, right? So there's sometimes, somebody in the organization, there will be a community of 5 people who've been visiting another company. They were over there in Seattle and they saw this, cool way of doing stuff. So if there's suddenly a momentum rising in the organization, I will say to the executive team, now is now, right? Because you can hear that they're talking about it over here, so let's go for that. And very often we try to create that, right? So we try to say, if we want more client service, then let's look at which bank branch is actually doing it really well, and let's just put camera up on them for a week, and let's see what they do. And then slowly but surely they get contaminated, right?
And I have also another question, if I can. And it's, if for doing your work, do you need any kind of psychologist background
Yeah.
or something like that, or anybody of us could do it?
Yes and no. I think it's. I want to say if you don't, it's like it's all the time like that when you're a manager or a consultant. I mean, I was working with the director of the news in the National Public Radio here in Denmark, and he said, "Well, when you're a journalist, you need to like stories. If you want to become a manager, you need to like journalists, right? So if you want to be a manager or an advisor, you need to like people. If you don't like people, if you don't like understanding why did they get into a fight, you know, how is the power relation between these guys? That's not your own curiosity, then don't go into it, because that's 80-90% of it, right? If that's possible for an engineer, but of course. I mean, a high number of my colleagues have an engineering background. Do they need to work with their way of talking? You bet, right? And the fundamental thing that they need to accept is, of course, that, like I've been discussing with my colleagues a lot, that one of my colleagues always says, you can have 1,000 opinions, but if you have one number, then you've got it. And I would argue, you can have 1,000 numbers, but if you've got one person having one opinion, you've got it. So what I'm basically just saying is that there's a rationale in the organization, and it's good to know something about production. But if you're not curious around the interpersonal relations and the game that's going on, then don't become a consultant or don't become a manager. Is that a psychological perspective? Yes. It's a psychological perspective, it's a sociological, it's a cultural, it's a language, it's a power perspective. There's a lot of things to know about in order to understand each other. But the best thing is you've been practicing that from the moment you were born, right?
So what have you studied before becoming a consultant?
Well, I had a very strict and very sort of, straight arrow career. So no, I studied liberal arts. I studied liberal arts for 5 years, some in Denmark, some in the US. I did cultural studies, I did language studies, I did literature. And then I did a business degree afterwards. And I want to say, if I look at what I use the most, it's my liberal arts background. Because basically, whether you study theater or literature or reality, that doesn't really matter. It's all about power and relations and points of view and stories. So I feel very privileged. Had I seen it coming when I was 23? Absolutely not. Right? So I think it's no matter which educational background you have, you can become a very good manager or a very good advisor.
Okay, we're going to take one last question.
Thank you. Thank you for you today being here, because really I and many of our friends pleased very much with your motivation lesson. But before I coming here, that I thought whether we motivate or not. Anyhow, finally you did your best. We are really surprised while you are teaching. And one of my last question is from my side, but it contains so many questions within this question. So how did you know, you have talked about the Tata Consultancy, Tata company in India. Really, there are so many companies in India, but the only company which works for the people is Tata. I love that company. Mm. So you have been told that one within your discussion. Mm. So how do you know that company, and did they get anything from you, or do you motivated from that company? So please tell me
about that. Yeah. So, and this is actually crucial. And this could be, back to why am I here and what's important. So a very a learning experience for me. Last year, every year there is a gathering of all the larger corporations in Denmark. It's called VL-døgnet. And there you will have 1,000 companies joining together to discuss global challenges. And there will normally be a long list of keynote speakers. And there was this year also. There was only one keynote speaker that inspired me. And he inspired me immensely, and he was from Tata Group. And there was 2 reasons why he inspired me. The one reason was the story that I just shared, that basically Tata is there for India. And I think, this summer I went to Harvard for a program, because I do a lot of work for boards. And in this group, we were 70 different nationalities. And in that group, it became very obvious that North American and European perspectives are extremely focused on societies are there for corporations because the corporations make the world go round, right? Now, that's not the perspective if you are from, the BRIC countries or from Africa. Then the perspective is the companies are there in order to develop society, right? And I would like to see it like you guys are seeing it, right? Because I think that if you go back before the financial crisis, I think that the North American and at least the European perspective was the same. We have corporations in order to develop society, right? So that was extremely inspiring from Tata. And then the last thing that was so inspiring from Tata was the guy, he's actually the guy in charge of consulting services in Tata. And he was asked, so European companies go to Asia to get inspiration. Where do you go? And he said, I go all over the map. And I thought that was very, that was a good lesson for us to learn. That sometimes in Europe we tend to say, oh, now we have to go there, now we have to go there, now we have to go there. He was spending all his time traveling to just look at what's going on out there. So I think there's a, on that note, it's a challenge to have Nordic born and raised companies not be arrogant in the way thinking, but we are a very developed society. Because from an organizational point of view, that's not true. I don't know whether that was answer enough. To me, from a leadership point of view, it's extremely inspiring to see how companies are being run by people with different backgrounds. And if you want to look at the success of some of the Nordic companies, it's probably because in their executive teams, I'm thinking about Lego again now, they have Nordic colleagues, but they also have a COO from India, right? So the mix tends to be a huge advantage.
Okay, and that is, we have an extra little thing that we're going to be doing today. Do we have Suna in the audience? Suna? Suna is not here. Well, then I will just give a little bit of an ad first we're going to say thank you to Henriette, and then we're going to move over to Søren and to Sa, and then Suna will be here to talk about most probably Suna will be here to talk about the Deloitte case competition. And we will first take a break. We're going to take how much? We're a little over time. We're going to take 10 minutes and then come back and be ready. I guess Henriette might be available for some questions. Thank you.